Hello and welcome everyone. My name's Tony Burke, and today I'm joined by my great colleague Christy Mullen, who's the Director of Burke and Associates, and I'm a consultant with the firm myself. Now Christy, can you give me a quick snapshot of the Burke and Associates history with property development?
Well, Tony, as you mentioned, we've been doing property development for the past 15 years or so. Now, I've been with the firm for about 14 years, and well before I became a director, I've been heavily involved in property development. We've done everything from a 2-lot subdivision up to 1,000 lots. In fact, just as COVID-19 hit the firm quite hard, we were in the midst of settling a 96-lot subdivision. We managed to get 75% of those lots settled.
That's pretty good.
On or before the due date for settlement, and that was all whilst working remotely through this difficult time. The 25% or so that didn't settle was primarily due to the purchaser's finance issues. So we've learned a lot over the years, and no two developments are the same. And there have been plenty of disputes, haven't there, Tony?
True, yes. Property developers, by and large, are a unique breed. They get to be successful by pushing the limits of what's achievable in the market and in various other fields. Many of our developers have been to VCAT to push the limits of the planning schemes in which their properties are located, pushing for more and more and more. Many have had disputes with the builders on the way through. Some have had raging disputes with non-bank lenders, and one particular dispute that comes to mind ended up in a protracted Supreme Court trial. And of course there are predictable disputes between developers and purchasers. Sometimes developers do things that are rather cheeky, knowing full well that the options available to purchasers are limited. We're reflecting on events in the property sector over the last 15 years and going forward. What's your view about the status of the property development economy over those 15 years?
Well, Tony, the data tells us that until recently the Australian economy was travelling quite well. We dodged a bullet with the GFC, and the population growth in Victoria seems to have matched or outstripped the growth in housing, leading to a buoyant sector of the economy. But what about now, Tony?
We know that international and interstate tourism has crashed, so the demand for short-term accommodation has crashed with it. Many Airbnb properties that were previously heavily populated by incoming migrants and tourists have returned to the long-term rental market, with the consequence that domestic and residential rents have fallen significantly. That's already very clear. And then you have the banks. The banks are skittish when things like this happen, and the credit availability for developers and for purchasers is both contracting. So when you get a tightening of credit at both ends, you have a contraction in the market. Builders can't keep rolling without cash flow, and developers can't keep their builders happy unless there is a solid pipeline of incoming purchasers. So there's likely to be some messiness when developments come to a conclusion, because purchasers who bought in more optimistic times find that their banks just can't approve funding against depressed property values. The social distancing will add further difficulty for developers in doing business. Everything just gets harder and everything will take longer. So rubbing all this together, we can reliably predict that there will be some credit constraints in the marketplace, and this will rebound in all sorts of directions.
So let's talk about the timeline for usual development. If you take, say, a 20-lot subdivision, you're looking at about 4 months or so to negotiate to acquire a property and then settle on that transaction for the development site. During those 4 months, depending on your contract, you may be able to start the planning permit application with the vendor's assistant, and that's if there's not already a planning permit for that development site. Once you settle on the property, you have, say, another 4 months to get your planning approval, and that's if you're not in the process of going through VCAT, which can often take anywhere from sort of 9 to 18 months. So then following your planning approval, you then have, say, 6 months to generate some pre-sales, and that's required in order for a developer to be able to obtain their construction finance with the benefit of those pre-sales, and then about 18 months to build the development and settle on those unsold lots. Now, in the event that there's some unsold lots, it then may take another 6 months or so to sell that remnant stock, if you're lucky, and another 6 months to sort out defect liability claims. So in really rough terms, you're looking at about 3 years to complete a development, and that's without a pandemic.
You made a reference there to remnant stock. What were you referring to there?
So remnant stock is when there's a number of pre-sales during the course of the development, construction is completed, we settle on the sold lots, but there's a number of lots that weren't sold at the outset and they remain unsold.
I think of it conceptually this way. You've got a development, and it's the top 10% that's the profit margin, and the top 10% or thereabouts is represented by the unsold properties. Until you sell everything in the development, you can't realise your profit. So it's commonly the case that developers will sell 90%, satisfy all those sale requirements, pay off their construction finance, but it's the remaining 10% where the profit lies. And quite commonly the developers just fail to put together some robust agreement between themselves to define what's going to happen with those apartments. And I can think of one development where we've both been involved. There are still 20 or 30 apartments remaining to be sold on a development in the CBD, which was otherwise complete about 3 years ago. So for the lack of a robust plan, the developers are locked together like two drowning men and can't get themselves apart and extract the value of their otherwise profitable project in order to go on with the next one. That of course leads to all sorts of litigation and dispute and argument, but it's a very common problem.
And I mean, Tony, the end result of that development is the developer has now actually gone into voluntary administration in order to resolve these issues.
So the key message I think is that developers must have robust, cover all the contingency type agreements before getting too far advanced. And I think increasingly now banks are, and construction financiers are expecting that.
So Tony, having been in the game quite a while now, how do you see things moving forward?
Looking at it from afar, it seems to me that here in Melbourne we live in a place that's been rated as one of the most livable cities in the world. We've had the benefit of increasing population over many years, and whilst there is a current downturn in overseas students, I expect that growth in population will increase. A growing population needs housing. Housing needs developers. So I'm fairly optimistic that we will move beyond this COVID-19 crisis. Australia is much better placed financially, economically than many other countries, and in the broad context of a property development being 3, 4, 5 years' time, I think we will look back and regard the COVID-19 year of 2020 as being something of a bump in the road, but that in general terms there is sufficient momentum in the economy, there is sufficient momentum in the property development sector that things will be okay. So on that note, Christy, can you tell us a little bit about the property law team at Burke & Associates? What sort of capacity have you got to assist property developers who need help in these areas?
So we have an experienced lawyer with over 15 years experience in the planning law space who's able to assist in all aspects of due diligence, planning permit applications, VCAT hearings and all of that. We then have quite a team of property lawyers who can assist in all phases of the development, whether it's in the structuring, in setting things up for the acquisition, in terms of putting robust legal agreements in place for the development, and also the subdivision and sales process.
And if problems arise and there is litigation, we also have some depth in our litigation team as well.
That's right, Tony.
So we can be confident of looking after our property developer clients and ensuring that they get the robust and comprehensive advice that they need.